Alrighty guys, so we are back with another video. Hopefully this will be pretty entertaining for you guys and helpful. Unfortunately, there was an issue with my phone, and the sound for all my video clips have gotten corrupt, so I'm going to have to do a voiceover. So, in this video, as the title and thumbnail shows, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a custom intake for only $30 for your NB Mazda Miata. So the great thing about this intake modification is that one, it's very DIY friendly. It's efficient because you're using pretty much all of your OEM stock intake parts. You really don't have to go out and buy anything for it. The only reason why it's $30 and not free is because I had to go buy a new aftermarket intake filter. If you already have one off of your old car, or you just have one laying around in the garage, you can use that as well. But pretty much this entire mod is free. You can do it at home with only a couple of tools, and it won't break the bank or anything, and it'll just be kind of a nice modification. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump right into what you guys are going to have to do. Alright, so step one, take the stock intake piping and airbox cover off of the car. When you do that, there'll be probably a few bolts. I don't know how many to be exact, just because mine was already kind of unbolted and stuff, but just unclip it from the intake box, and then you'll be able to take the entire intake tube off, and then the airbox as well. As you can see here, I'm pointing out where the MAF is. There's two bolts that hold in, I think they're like 10 mils. There's just two bolts that hold in the MAF sensor. It's kind of just this round tube housing of the MAF sensor. So undo those two bolts, and then you can just pop that MAF sensor right on out. Here is the mass airflow sensor itself. As you can see, it's kind of just like this round piece with the plug for the sensor. It has some mesh on the inside, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these are the things that I picked up from AutoZone. You can get your filters off eBay. You can get K&N or whatever fucking aftermarket other filters that they have out there on the market. There's plenty of them, so you can get whatever filter of your choice you want. I just went with AutoZone just because it was local, and I've always used these Spectre intake filters, and they've always been great. You know, they're cheap, and they're pretty good quality, and they've just worked well. So I have the air intake filter, and then over there, that little guy is going to be for the valve cover. That will be the crankcase pressure fucking filter. So pretty much you will be deleting that rubber hose that goes from the valve cover to your intake tube, and you'll completely be deleting that with this mod, and you'll be putting that tiny breather filter to replace that hose on the valve cover. Alright, you don't have to do this next part that I'm showing in this clip right now, but this is just me showing off my new air filter on the mass airflow sensor. Now, as you can see here, the mesh, what you want to do is face the mesh portion of the mass airflow sensor. When you do put it all together, face the mesh towards the new air filter. You don't want to have it flipped around the other way, just because I think that would mess up the sensor a bit. But when you do it, just make sure you have the mesh pointed in the direction of where the filter is. Alrighty, so for the next step, this will be your stock intake tube off of your car, and you will actually have to be cutting this down a bit. You'll be cutting it on the side that connected to your intake manifold and throttle body. If you cut it on the other side, the sizing is a little bit different because that's the part that goes into your airbox. So don't cut off that portion. Cut off the side that connects to your throttle body and intake manifold. So I have paused the video here, and I have drawn a line. This is about where you want to cut. You can use an angle grinder, hacksaw, bandsaw, whatever you want to use to cut it. But this is where you want to cut the intake piping. So after you have made your cut, the new intake piping for your custom intake should look something like this. So at that point, it should be like a 90-degree bend. Although when you do cut it, give yourself a little leeway room, because you do still have to fit in your IAT sensor, which is your air temperature sensor. Alright, so after you have your new intake piping cut down, you will have to shave down the inside. I just used a wire wheel on a drill to shave it down. The reason for this is because the inner diameter of your intake piping and the outer diameter of your mass airflow sensor is pretty much identical, so you will have to shave the piping down on the inside to squeeze it over the outside of the mass airflow sensor. At this point, you can go ahead and put it all together. You will have your new air filter, the mass airflow sensor, and then your new intake piping. Now, to warn you, even after shaving down the inside of the intake piping, it's still going to be super hard to get on. Just use your muscles, use some leverage and some strength, and you will be able to squeeze it over the top of the mass airflow sensor. One recommendation though, once you get it on there, don't take it back off, because it's going to be a bitch to get on. So when you put it on correctly, and don't take it off ever again, because it's very tricky to get it on, although when you do get it on, it'll work great. So unfortunately, at this part in the tutorial, I did not take a video of me doing it, although you will have to drill a hole and relocate your IAT sensor, which is your air temperature sensor. So you will have to use like a Christmas tree drill bit or a step down drill bit, whatever you want to call it, and then take the sensor itself, the sensor grommet, and then drill a hole and then put it in. I do not know what size it is, so I do apologize. Kind of just eyeball it and then squeeze it in there. Remember, don't drill too big. Kind of be a bit reserved when drilling the hole, just because if it's tighter, then that's better than it being loose, because obviously you're dealing with air. So just go ahead, drill the hole, and then put in the grommet for the sensor, and then put the sensor in, and then you'll be able to plug in the pigtail for the IAT sensor. Alright, so at this point in the tutorial, the intake itself should be complete, and it should look something like this. As you can see, there's the new air filter, the mass airflow sensor, your intake tube that's at the 90-degree bend, and then the little IAT sensor. Note to self about the IAT sensor, you don't have to put it exactly where I did. You can put it on the outside, doesn't matter, just make sure it's in there. Now for the final part is the wiring. And I know wiring stuff might sound really complicated and scary, but it's not. This is pretty simple. So the two plugs for the two sensors on the intake are going to be on the exhaust side of your engine. Pretty much just follow the wiring harness back up and unloom the two plug wires out of it, and then you can just retape it back up. As you can see, that's what I did here for the front. It's kind of zip tied and taped all back together, and then we have the two plugs. The one in the front right here is a bit shorter, and that is for the MAF sensor. And then you can just go ahead and plug that in right in the front. And then the other one, I pretty much put mine kind of below the intake filter, and then kind of just ran it in the back, and then plugged that into the IAT sensor. So like I said, pretty easy. Again, you don't have to do it exactly like how I did, but it's really not that hard. Just kind of unloom it, take the wires out, and move them to the intake side of your engine. So now your DIY custom Miata intake is now complete. Your engine will run exactly like OEM. There won't be any check engine lights or any codes popping up, none of that. It'll run just like OEM, and it'll sound really good.